Today we are talking about an agent-based model which simulates how affordable housing negotiations might turn out in England. This model looks at two main types of negotiations, one between a developer and a planning authority, and another between a developer and a social landlord. It shows different possible results and helps us understand what might happen during these talks. So, to begin, could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Aya Badawi, and I'm currently a lecturer of urban planning and architecture at the Architectural Engineering Department in Alexandria University in Egypt. But the model that we're going to talk about today, it was part of my PhD at the University of Manchester in the UK.
Let's start by talking about the purpose of this model. Uh, what is the model trying to achieve?
So the model is mainly like an educational model. Its purpose, it's designed to help students and researchers generate hypotheses about the negotiations of affordable housing in England. So the main challenge that we're facing is that there are negotiations that occur in England and they are frequent, and the affordable housing, a large percent of the affordable housing is provided through those negotiations. But the challenge is that actually in reality those negotiations are difficult to be accessed in reality. And as one of the researchers once said, they often happen behind closed doors. So our idea is that if we have this virtual laboratory of simulating and negotiations, it could help researchers and students, for example, try to generate hypotheses about the process. And here we need to emphasize that the results that come out of the model are not meant to be predictive of what will really happen if you do the negotiations, but as if they are thought experiments, as if they open your eyes into, well, this could be a potential risk, or this could be a potential hypothesis. Let's take it and do further research on it, or let's take it and do further experiments. So it's like a tool for experimentation and exploration. And yes, it can be used for research and education and something like that, but it's not meant to be a predictive tool.
Building a model like this might have its challenges. What were some of the hardest parts in the development process? For example, was it challenging to represent the strategies and choices of the stakeholders? Or to simulate how these negotiations play out?
If I can like summarize the challenges, I can maybe summarize them in five main challenges. So first of all, the main challenge for me as a researcher when I was doing the model is that I had no prior experience at all of programming. Not just doing a model, but I had no prior experience of programming. And this is maybe for anyone watching us, it would be a motivation stuff that you can do it even if you don't know how to program. And then there comes the challenge of how to parameterize the system itself. So the problem is that models in negotiations are, especially in urban planning, are very, very limited. And negotiations in urban planning are different from common negotiations, like, for example, negotiations in buying and selling. And other things also is that negotiation in reality involves a lot of argumentation. In my case, I did not involve the argumentation, and this was a challenge, is that how can I simplify the process that is actually very complex in reality into very simple parameters. Other thing is that also the English planning system itself and the negotiation that happens, the many issues that can be negotiated, and also the alternatives are other challenges. And then documenting and describing the model, because it has a lot of lines of code. I think it reaches around like 1,000 lines of code, although it is a simple negotiation. But then how can I then describe this coding into a simple documentation that anyone can read and try to understand how the model is designed? And maybe the last thing is then how to validate the model. So let me say that the outputs of the model, I said that the outputs are not predictive. So let me describe how the outputs are generated. So the model does not generate a number, which is like when they negotiate, this is the exact outcome that will happen, but actually it generates a range of outcomes, like possible outcomes, and the probability that each outcome can occur.
Let's talk about the findings of this model. What behaviors or patterns have you seen from the analysis of this model? And have you noticed any surprising results?
What we did is that, okay, let the agents negotiate affordable housing in two different development projects. One in a housing, like housing market, where all the values and all the costs and everything is high, and another one where all the costs and or the values are a bit low. And let's see how the negotiation will unfold. And what one of the hypotheses that were generated is that the negotiation skills, however, the agents change their negotiation skills, because what happens in the model is that it runs several times, and each time agents, as if they approach the negotiation with different skills or with different ways of negotiating the problem. And however they change it like different times, they will always be restricted by a range of possible outcomes, which is these outcomes is restricted by the values of the construction cost of the development project, or what we call the housing market. And this was something that was a bit eye-opening, because we always say that in negotiating affordable housing, the experts and many people say that skills of the officers and skills of the negotiators are very critical, and the affordable housing that we get might be prone to how people negotiate it, which is okay, but to some extent, this is what we noticed from the model, that actually the reason or the outcome could be restricted by other things rather than the skills. It could be restricted by the values of the market itself. But this is again a hypothesis. And another hypothesis that we got is that we tried, for example, to let the agents raise their target when they get into the negotiation, like, for example, starting with a very high value, and let's see if they will get a high outcome when the negotiation ends. But then what we discovered in the thought experiment that we conducted is that because they are negotiating several issues, not one issue, not always that you raise your goal or you raise your target value, that you will always achieve a higher outcome. Sometimes, actually, because you're negotiating several issues, raising your target could lead you to fail the negotiation rather than achieving a better outcome.
This model is available for others to use on the comsys.net.
Yes.
Did you face any difficulties in getting it ready for the public using this platform? How did you make sure it's clear and easy to use for those who want to try it?
So I think it's not, when we share the model to others, at the same time it helps us the modelers before it helps others, because for example, I did the model like a couple of years ago, and even if, although it is me who did the model, but if I didn't document it properly and if I didn't write all the annotations in the code, me myself, despite me doing the model, I will forget what is the code that I wrote. So documenting the model and writing it in a way that is very clear in describing it, it helps us, the modelers, before it helps others. I described the model using the ODD protocol, and this was again very helpful sometimes. And it happened also in my case. As I was documenting the model, I felt that, well, this part, maybe I coded it in a more complicated way than it should have been. And I got back to the code and I started to modify the code, because when you're doing it and just coding and coding and coding, and you're not writing it in a way that is clear, sometimes it gets complicated as you go and as you are coding the model days on and days on. So when I tried to describe the model and doing this consistency and putting, let's say, we spent a lot of time with my supervisor at that time in how to make certain terminologies for the different variables, so that whenever the readers can go back and understand, okay, we're talking about this and that methodology, and also do the conceptual diagrams for the architecture of the agent and how the process goes. All these help me again to simplify the code, So it's like going back and forth between documenting and coding. So I don't think that it was a challenge, but it was a helpful way to document the model and share it.
What's next for this model? Are there plans to expand it or add new features to explore even more about, how affordable housing negotiations work?
Yes, so let me say that in my PhD, it's not only this model. There is another model. The other model is a bit more step forward than NoD-Neg. The other model not only simulates the negotiation, but simulates how the agents feel while negotiating. So it displays the emotions in some sort of emojis at the end of showing the how the process of the negotiation, and in each step it displays the emoji how the agent was feeling when it made this decision or this proposal. And the idea is that, well, if this in my model in the NoD-Neg, the idea was to generate hypotheses on how the impact of the housing market and the local policies and the skills will affect the negotiation outcomes. This was NoD-Neg. In the other model, when we put some more advanced things, it was, well, how their emotions while negotiation or how their expectations before negotiating can affect the negotiation outcomes. This is one step forward. Another thing is that we conducted like a workshop with the experts from the real housing market, like experts representing developers, experts with local authorities, and also the housing associations or the social landlords. And we took their opinions about the parameterization and the design of the model. What do you
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining me and sharing your thoughts about this model.
Thank you, Mohsen, for allowing me this opportunity to talk about it.